sort of as invited about collaborative group work and dialogue and the role of that, and just giving you a bit of input on that. Starting with the kind of the classroom culture, we know that dialogue's only going to flourish when students feel comfortable to contribute, to try out ideas without being afraid of being laughed at, without being afraid to fail. And in fact, this kind of supportive classroom ethos is positively associated with learning gains for students. As so many of you will remember from our final workshop, if you came to that must have been just over a year ago now. And as we emphasise in the teacher setup pack that most of you have got copies of. So it's not just a kind of nice thing to have, but it's actually a really important thing for supporting students' learning. So some of the content I'll be talking about today is ways that we can kind of create that atmosphere for students, and particularly for group work to help them participate. So what's the value of group work? Why would we want to do it? Again, dialogue in pairs or in small groups is strongly associated with learning gains, and just want to think about why that is. Why would that actually be? It's giving children a chance to rehearse, to practice ideas, to talk in a safer environment with just a few friends, a few peers, to practice reasoning and problem solving without the teacher present, to learn from each other, and to make their thinking and their reasoning visible to each other by talking. And this again is kind of associated with learning. So making their ideas explicit and explaining them to others, it looks from the research that helps them to stimulate reflection and think about ideas in a more challenging way than they might have done. Then other students can reflect on those ideas that they might share if they bring them back to the whole class arena. And there are ways that we can look at that more systematically, which I'll talk about. So it's basically, going beyond passive listening, if you like. Unfortunately though, children typically find it quite hard to work together in groups. They find it quite challenging. You may have experienced that in your own classrooms. Has that ever happened? No, never? Okay, good. And we need to help them to do this. We need to teach them really, and we need to give them practice. They're not going to necessarily do it naturally. We also have to have activities that are supportive of dialogue. So it's really important to design the activities so that they're really conducive to the dialogue. Having open questions to stimulate ideas are great, but children often just want to express their own ideas. They don't necessarily want to listen very carefully to other people's ideas. So as I'm sure you've experienced. So we want to kind of help them to do that, and also not to just address the teacher, but also to interact with each other. Ground rules, I think you're probably all familiar with that. Ways of having some sort of guidelines in the classroom that the teacher and the students can agree to follow. Incentive stems that kind of go with them. So ways of sort of getting them in the habit of using those kinds of expressions, such as "I disagree with so and so because," those kind of things. And these kind of ground rules can be used in group work or whole class discussions in the same kind of rules. And the research shows that if you actually give the group the responsibility for the whole group's learning, that actually helps the students who might have been struggling a bit, the lower attaining students, to actually move forward. As opposed to the teacher taking all of that responsibility. Sometimes if you have a mixed group, you can get the children to actually take the responsibility for ensuring that everybody has had a go, everybody's participated, and that everybody's grasped the material by the end of the session. Give them that responsibility. So how can we actively support students in this kind of commenting and challenging on other students' ideas and really engaging with them? We have to plan opportunities for dialogue in advance, and thinking about our dialogic intention. What actually do we want to happen in terms of the dialogue in the class? What's the aim there? So think about tasks where you actually require students to work together on a shared outcome. And for them to succeed, they kind of have to do that. So in other words, opportunities for dialogue are built into the activities, what we're sort of looking for. So it's hard for them to escape those opportunities when that's actually what the task requires. Constructing a joint object of some kind is something that really helps to make the reasoning and the learning visible, and is shown to be kind of associated with classes that are more successful. So that could be all kinds of things. I'm sure you have your own ideas. There's a few sort of possibilities up there. Something like a concept map that they do together is great because they have to discuss the ideas. They have to agree what's going to go down there, and that in itself kind of generates dialogue. So here's some examples of these kind of artifacts, if you like, these ones that children might construct together. It could be a story. There's a circle map with number ways to make 10, for example. There's a science example. There's a sort of a concept map, sorting activity. So these are just some things, some examples, and I'm sure you can probably think of some others. Okay, talking points. I think, again, this is probably a technique that's familiar to many people, but maybe not everybody. And this is based on the notion that we actually have to have different ideas to weigh up and to discuss. Otherwise, it's really hard for there to be any dialogue. As one student sort of said to me, well, if everybody agrees, then there's nothing to talk about, and that really is true. So putting students together with different perspectives, or getting them to compare different perspectives or ideas or theories, is the way that we can generate dialogue and also creative ideas. It kind of depends on that, but not just sort of discussing them, carelessly, but evaluating them, looking at the value of them, and this notion that not all ideas are born equal. Some of them do have more merit, some of them do have more scientific validity or more mathematical correctness or whatever it is, and we need to evaluate those. We need to encourage children to learn to do that and to discuss. So talking points is one way. It's a powerful technique that we can use for students to express agreement or disagreement with an idea, not necessarily with a person. That can be a little bit less personal. We have ideas that we pose for them to discuss. And obviously they need to do that respectfully when they are challenging each other. Again, that all comes down to the ground rules and the climate in the classroom. But basically these are points they're statements that require the students to take positions and to justify those positions and to say whether they agree or disagree. And again, they could be used in whole class or in group work. So basically it's a case of posing a statement rather than asking a question. Because if you ask a question, it kind of implies there's an answer. Whereas if there's a statement, then clearly you could discuss that for some indeterminable amount of time. So it can help dialogue to be sustained for a bit longer. And the statements need to be rich and generate debate. They need to be a little bit provocative, a little bit non-obvious, a little bit interesting to the students. And they could be based on factual curriculum material, or they could be more imaginative, or they could be based on personal and social health education. There could be all kinds of different types of things. So a few examples, for those of you who aren't so familiar with these, there's some science ones there about magnets, and just ask the students to agree or disagree. Those kind of things they quite enjoy talking about. And then some talking points about talk itself. Quiet people have nothing to say, talking can change your mind. These ones are quite nice. And there's a nice book by Lynn Dawes that has it's a book written for teachers with lots of resources on talking points if anybody wants to know more. I think there's some resources online as well. In fact, in the Teacher Centre pack there's some examples which are taken from her book. Okay, so some other tips for sort of high quality group work. Again, focusing on difference and disagreement. Just making the point that actually groups don't have to come to a shared agreement at the end of a discussion. They don't have to reach consensus. But what the research shows is that the process of trying to get there is what's really important for learning. Okay, so the debate around the ideas. We might agree to disagree at the end, or we might just not resolve the problem or the issue at all and might have to pick it up next lesson. But the process of that kind of debate is what's rich for dialogue, but also supportive of learning. And some of the research on group work in science carried out by my colleague Christine Howe shows that actually when students encounter different views to their own, it kind of primes them to then be receptive to views that relate to that topic, even well after they've left the lesson, weeks later. So what they did was they did some group work, they discussed it, they did a post-test at the end of the session to see how much the students had learned from each other and so on. And then they did a delayed post-test. So several weeks later they tested the kids again And they had learnt more by that point than they had when they left the room, with no intervention or teaching, whatever in between. It was really quite striking. And it was just the thought that had gone on in between, the kind of priming them to be open to that particular phenomenon, you know, in science that they might have encountered in real life, and to think, if they said that, maybe that is actually, maybe my original idea wasn't quite right. Let's look for, you know, they kind of unconsciously look for evidence in both directions and come to a kind of reasoned conclusion. So, so we mustn't be afraid of, you know, different views, expressing those views, and also not expecting learning to take place immediately. You know, it's obviously an ongoing process, and many things will affect it, some beyond your control, but in this case, you know, in a positive way. But that effect only happened where the perspectives were different to start with. They had to be sufficiently different for that learning to take place. Okay, so also just the notion of when to intervene. Now, you may have experienced this when students are talking in a group or a pair, and it looks like they're quite productive. How long do you give them, you know, before you come along and say something? Especially if you think they're slightly going off on a tangent. You know, I don't mean that they're off task, but maybe that their ideas are not quite going in the direction you were hoping for. I think that's quite a difficult decision. I mean, I find that quite difficult, you know, decision to make, and maybe. It's tricky to tell when is it intervening in a productive way and when is it actually interfering. And there's the Spring Project, which I think, did you circulate that reading, Luke? Yeah. So the reading that Luke circulated had some case studies in it. I think case study number 1 was the Spring Project, which is a group work project that some colleagues I know were involved in. And what they reported was that sometimes when the teacher approached the group, the dialogue just stopped dead, basically. You know, the children stopped their productive discussion and waited for the teacher to, you know, sort them out or give them the next instruction or whatever it was. But that was a shame because some of the opportunities for dialogue got, you know, prematurely curtailed. So it's not an easy thing to do to make that decision, but sometimes perhaps just holding back a little bit longer and seeing what might play out, what might arise, is a technique you could hold, you could try out. And similarly, just withholding feedback, just not answering, not giving a correct answer when students ask you a question, throwing it back to them, throwing it open to the class, perhaps even withholding that feedback until the following lesson, letting them think about it in between, letting them do an investigation in between, some research. We don't always have to leave the classroom with everything sorted out and resolved and the questions answered, the problem solved, the resolutions in place. Dialogue can continue, as I said already, outside of the classroom and across lessons. So yeah, it's kind of nice to think of ways that might happen. Okay, so how do we know when groups are working productively? It's not always that obvious to be able to tell, especially if you've got, you know, quite a few going on. So we can use some certain tools to look at this quite systematically, and the Teacher Setup Hack has got some tools that you can use in that. So basically it's based on the notion that it's important to look at just more than the talk, more than what they're actually saying, but who's participating, you know, how well are they working together. So in the pack we've got 2 different kinds of tools. One is the sort of coding template, so those of you who were involved in Teacher Centre inquiries last year will be familiar with the coding scheme, and that's about systematically observing specific elements of group dialogue. So you can choose, you know, particular codes, particular kinds of dialogic statements or questions that people might say, and you can look for those. We also have rating scales for the kind of quality of collaboration. So I'm not sure whether any of you have used these tools for observing group work before. Did anybody use those in their inquiries? I'm not sure. Yeah, a few did. Okay, so some of you may have done that. Okay, good. So you'll be able to tell your colleagues a bit more then. So this is the group work scale, and this basically gives you an indication of the essential ingredients for high quality group work, if you like. So there are 10 points, and hopefully you can read that. And if you have the pack, it's the last page, I think, on the pack as well. There's one example of it on the last page. Yeah, the very back of the pack. Should have one. It may not be on the materials you've got there. Anyhow, I can circulate it, but this is basically what it is. It's got 10 elements about children staying in the group and working together, staying on task, having a positive attitude, building on each other's ideas, justifying their ideas, evaluating, like I was mentioning earlier, trying to reach consensus or compromise, and like I said, not necessarily getting there, involving productive discussion and perhaps some conflict. And that if they do have different roles in the groups, that doesn't sort of obstruct the whole group work. So this is a scale that it's a 3-point scale. You can see it's not true or partly true or very true. You would rate each one of those things. You wouldn't do the ratings very often. It might be once in a lesson, or it might be an episode of group work, for however long they're working together, 10 minutes or 20 minutes or however long. So you just decide once what the rating will be at the end of the group work or during the group work episode. And then you can see how it pans out. So you could use this to observe in the classroom while you're teaching, while a group is going on for a short period, or if you had the opportunity to go to somebody else's classroom, that would be another option. Somebody else could be observing in your classroom. And I know you do lesson study here, right? So it would be a perfect thing. You could use it with lesson study, because the people who are observing could have a copy and could do the ratings while you can get on with the teaching, and you can focus on what the students are doing. But equally, the students could use this. Students can reflect on their own learning, so they can think. You could just ask them how well they think they work together. Did everybody actually participate? Did somebody not say anything? Did somebody not seem to understand? How can we help? Did they learn anything from each other? Did that make them change their minds? So students can address those kind of questions, but they can also be more systematic, as you are, and rate their own group work quality. And the example on the back of the pack is the student version. I think it's the secondary school version. We also have a version for primary school, which is on our online resources. So it's very similar to the teacher version. It's just a slightly student-friendly language, and it's we did this and we did that rather than watching it. But again, it's quite a powerful tool, because I think even just using it makes them think about what they should be attending to next time they're doing the group work. If they know they're going to have to be rating themselves on these things, then hopefully they will be attempting to do these things, if you see what I mean. So yeah, it's a tool you could use. Okay, so those are the kinds of things, and as I said, the coding scheme you already know about, so I'm not going to go into that one, but it's in the pack. So just some summary points then. So firstly, about the classroom culture and the tasks. So we've got the ground rules, we've got oracy skills, speaking and listening. Again, I know oracy is one of the foci here, right? Encouraging students to take risks, to actually make mistakes, to learn from those, and for everybody to learn from those. And trying to create a culture that has a critical challenge element to it, but in a polite and respectful way, so nobody feels bad. But comparing and evaluating ideas. And again, ideas and not people. And then devising some open-ended group tasks that can support dialogue, can support inquiry, and hopefully have a shared outcome, so that they're all working towards that. And those could involve constructing a joint object, a joint artifact, and exploring differences using things like talking points. So then involving students in the active learning themselves, so composing mixed groups, assigning the students the responsibility for making sure that group works well, everybody's collaborating, everybody's participating, and everybody's learning something, and encourage them to self-evaluate that. And then also ask them to share the outcomes of what they've done in their groups with the class, making their thinking and their reasoning explicit. Again, that actually supports their learning. Just framing and summarizing what they're going to say is very supportive of their learning, just making it explicit. And then ideally ask other people to comment on that. And this is, again, just reminding you that, consensus isn't essential, but having the authentic dialogue is enough to kind of trigger that self-reflection. And you could systematically observe the group. Thinking about intervening, when's the optimal time to do that? Students don't always need an answer. Living with uncertainty is a good thing, and just allowing that to provoke them to want to do further inquiry, and to provoke, further dialogue. Okay, and then, so finally, well, almost finally, a challenge for you, which is to think about planning for a group work activity around a topic that you will need to be teaching soon, where disagreement is likely and critical and constructive challenging could be encouraged. So if you can think about some topic that you've got coming up that might lend itself to that would be good. And then ideally where they can share the outcomes with other groups or with the whole class. But even sharing with another group is just as productive for their learning. And then you could hopefully observe them systematically or get somebody else to do that and try out one of those tools. If you've used one of them before, maybe try a different one and see how that goes. Try the rating, try the coding, and see which one sort of seems most appropriate and what you can learn from that, and whether were they actually working as well as you thought they were. Were there any surprises? So that's my challenge to you after I've left. And then just finally, this is about trialing the ongoing development of TSEDA in a technology context with Katie and the Year 4 classes who are going to be using Weeby, right, coming up. So yeah, we can also invite anybody else who might like to try it in other areas of computing or to do with technology use. So it's basically using the TSEDA pack, but the codes will be, the dialogue moves, if you like, will be related to technology use. So for example, building on ideas might be not just me building on your idea orally, but it might be on a screen, adding an idea on, adding an object on, adding a link on a food chain, whatever it was. So a kind of, physical or technological version of that. Yeah.
Would that be using it like any particular type of software? I'm just thinking like, obviously it naturally lends itself to something like a Google Doc. But what,
Yep.
I mean, I'm thinking with our platforms, obviously like YouTube, when the children were watching it, it's very hard to know where, dialogue moves might have been coming from children because we can't see where they're coming. So I'm just wondering, like, lower down the school, if we were to look at text TSEDA, how that would look. Yeah.
Well, that's an open question that we will be, finding the answer to.
Okay.
That's not something I have the answer to. I mean, I think it's just a way of applying what we know about dialogue in a technology-mediated, setting, if you like. So, in theory, any kind of technology use, is viable for that. Obviously, some lend themselves more to dialogue than others, perhaps. So it's a question of thinking about that. What are the opportunities for dialogue in that particular activity with technology? Yeah, I mean, Google Doc and that kind of thing, as you say, it lends itself perfectly. Using a whiteboard or a display, interactive screen also does. But there are many other kinds of technology use. So yeah, I think that's what this is an inquiry that we're embarking on, kind of with you. Not something I'm bringing fully formed, to give you. It's not fully developed at all. It's in its early stages. So this is an inquiry that if you'd like to participate in, you're very, very welcome. It's something that I'm wanting to sort of develop for a long time, and it's kind of been very slow progress. And now I've got some people interested. It's really great. So yeah, to have some collaborators in that would be terrific. So anybody who's interested, just let me know.
We decided on Weeby to begin with because it's a research project where the children have to see in the same pairs for the 6-week programme. So we thought from there we could observe the specific pairs over 6 weeks, and then from there develop it into other areas.
Yeah, which is kind of ideal. But it can be used. I mean, even if you are mixing up the groups, we can still use it. Yeah. So that is it really. There's some links there, and I'll share this PowerPoint if you like. You know about the teacher center thing, and we have some video clips we have some more clips up on the site now, taken in primary schools around England in Year 6 classes, various forms of dialogue. There's 1 or 2 on talking points, ground rules, other questioning, all kinds of things. So yeah, so take a look if you want to see any clips. They're quite short, they're mostly less than 5 minutes. And yeah, absolutely contact me with anything else. And I'm very, very happy to answer questions if anybody's got me as well.